Snowhole Cave was not an ordinary place. It was cold, silent, and so dark that even near the entrance, light disappeared into its damp stone walls. Every step inside felt like going deeper into a place where no one should be. On July 13, 1994, 3 experienced cavers, Aaron, Kevin, and David, entered this cave without knowing how dangerous their journey would become. They thought they were ready. They had climbed caves before, faced narrow paths and steep drops. But Snowhole was different. It had secrets hidden in its darkness, secrets that would test their strength, their courage, and their will to survive. Before we dive into video, please subscribe to our channel. As always, viewer discretion is advised. As the team moved deeper into Snowhole Cave, the path grew tighter, muddier, and more exhausting. Each obstacle drained their energy, but they kept going, unaware of what was ahead. Then they reached a narrow, vertical fissure so tight it was known among cavers as the Stripper. The name alone was enough to spark fear. It wasn't just a challenge, it was a nightmare. This passage didn't simply test strength, it squeezed the body, crushing the chest, pressing in from both sides like the cave itself wanted to trap them forever. Getting through it required perfect body control and calm nerves. One wrong move could mean getting stuck, with no way out. The team had passed through it on their way in, with gravity helping them slide downward. But they knew that coming back up through the Stripper would be much worse. It would be a fight against gravity, exhaustion, and fear. Still, they pushed forward, knowing they would face it again on the way out. At that moment, they had no idea that this one narrow crack would nearly cost a life. After hours of crawling, climbing, and squeezing through tight, muddy passages, the team finally reached the deeper end of the cave. Their clothes were soaked in sweat, their bodies covered in mud, and every muscle ached from the effort. The air had turned stale, heavy with silence. They were nearly 600 feet below the surface, far away from sunlight and safety. Now came the real challenge, getting back out. The return trip would mean retracing every painful step, including climbing back up the Stripper. Gravity had helped them descend, but now it would work against them. They were tired, low on energy, and running out of time. Still, they didn't stop. Aaron began the journey back toward the surface. Kevin and David stayed behind to give space. The plan was clear. David would go up next, and Kevin would follow. It seemed simple, but deep inside that cave, nothing was ever simple. As David approached the Stripper and prepared to climb, the cave grew colder, quieter, as if it were watching, waiting. The real test was about to begin. David stood at the base of the Stripper, staring up at the narrow, chest-crushing fissure. He took a deep breath, knowing the climb would be brutal. As he began, he exhaled to shrink his chest, forcing his body into the tight space. Inch by inch, he pulled himself upward, his pack swaying beneath him, snagging on the jagged walls. The higher he went, the tighter it became. Soon his chest was wedged so firmly he couldn't move. He exhaled again, trying to create space, but there was none left. He was stuck. Panic crept in as he struggled to breathe. The walls pressed against him like a vice. His pack tugged him downward, making it worse. He tried shifting, clawing at the stone, but nothing worked. His voice cracked as he told Kevin below that he was trapped. Time slowed. Every second brought more fear, more exhaustion. David wasn't just stuck, he was being crushed. Breathing became harder, muscles trembled. He was alone, helpless, and buried deep in the earth. And the cave wasn't letting go. David's breathing grew shallow. The cave felt tighter with every second. Kevin, still below, urged him to drop his pack. It was pulling him down and making escape impossible. David hesitated. That pack held his food, batteries, and gear. Letting it go meant losing his only backup if things got worse. But he had no choice. 45 minutes had passed, and his strength was fading. His headlamp flickered, sweat burning his eyes. With numb fingers, he unclipped the tether and let the pack fall. It crashed into the rocks below, echoing in the dark. But even without the weight, David couldn't move. His chest was still pinned, arms too weak to pull, legs cramping. The decision to drop the pack hadn't freed him. It had only shown how truly stuck he was. Panic returned, colder this time. The walls pressed closer, breathing hurt. He was sinking into collapse. Kevin called up, desperate, asking if there was any progress. David could barely answer. His voice cracked, dry and fading. He whispered the truth. "I'm still stuck." and time was running out. Kevin knew they were almost out of time. David had been trapped for too long, and his strength was slipping away. Without wasting a moment, Kevin climbed up as far as he could below David, bracing his back against one wall and his feet against the other. He reached up and placed his hands on David's boots. "I'm going to push on 3, he said. With all his strength, Kevin shoved upward. David gritted his teeth, pulling with what little energy he had. For a second, he moved but then stopped again, still stuck. Gasping, David begged to try once more. Kevin adjusted, braced harder, and pushed again. Nothing. David's limbs were shaking, muscles failing, his body reaching its limit. He could feel it, his body was giving up. This was no longer just about getting unstuck, it was about survival. Kevin looked up and did the only thing left. He called for help. "Aaron, we need help!" His voice echoed through the cave. Far above, Aaron heard the urgency. Something was wrong, very wrong, and now everything depended on him. Aaron didn't wait. The moment he heard Kevin's voice echoing from deep inside the cave, he knew it was serious. He scrambled back through the narrow tunnels toward the stripper. When he reached the top and looked down, his headlamp lit a heartbreaking sight. David's body wedged in the rock, pale and soaked in sweat, barely moving. Aaron acted fast. He anchored a rope, lowered it down, and told Kevin to secure it around David. Kevin struggled in the tight space, but managed to wrap the rope around him. Then, bracing himself, Aaron began to pull. At first, nothing happened. David's ribs screamed in pain as the rope tightened, but slowly, inch by inch, his body began to move. The rock fought back, gripping him like a trap, but Aaron didn't stop. With one final pull, David slid free from the fissure. Kevin caught him before he collapsed. His limbs were shaking uncontrollably, his breath ragged. He had been trapped for over 2 hours, but now, finally he was free. Broken, exhausted, but alive. The cave had lost its grip. With David finally free, he and Kevin didn't waste time. Together, they began the slow, painful climb toward the surface. Every step was a struggle. David's muscles were weak, his body drained, but he kept moving. Kevin stayed close, helping him through the tight passages they had once confidently entered. Now, they were different, wiser, humbled by the cave's power. As they neared the entrance, the air began to change. It felt lighter, cooler, and full of life. Then, at last, they saw at the mouth of Snowhole Cave glowing with natural light. They stumbled out into the open, falling onto solid ground. David collapsed onto his back, eyes fixed on the sky. He had never been so grateful to see the sun. The wind, the trees, the warmth of daylight, it all felt like a miracle. Snowhole had nearly taken him. It had tested every part of him, body, mind, and spirit. But he had survived. He was alive. And yet, the story wasn't over. Because not everyone who entered Snowhole would be so lucky. The next diver wouldn't return. Even the strongest can break. Never underestimate nature's power. Stay prepared, stay calm, and never face darkness alone. Survival needs wisdom.